My name is Margaret Rose Winters. I was born and raised in New York City, the daughter of two hardworking, no-nonsense parents who raised me to believe in independence. Real, raw, unshakable independence. I watched my mother juggle multiple jobs and manage a household, and my father worked as a lawyer, often coming home late, his briefcase as heavy as his obligations. Their world was driven by responsibility, duty, and an unspoken rule. You make your own way in this world, or you get left behind. As a child, I took those lessons to heart. I wasn't one to ask for help. I never needed to. I thrived on that sense of control, that ability to decide, to manage, to steer my life in whatever direction I wanted. I had big dreams, like everyone else, dreams of success, of leaving a mark on the world. I wanted to make a difference, especially in the lives of those who felt lost and helpless. I went on to become a substance abuse counselor at the age of 28, driven by a desire to save people from the kind of self-destruction I had seen so many succumb to. I wrote a book about addiction and recovery, a guide to overcoming substance abuse that became widely respected in the field. I'd found my calling, or so I thought. But deep down, there was always a shadow, a little voice, quiet at first, that whispered doubt, whispered fear. It was the same voice that told me I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't maintain the facade of being the person everyone thought I was. That voice was alcohol. I'd always been a drinker, nothing major, just social, here and there. But it never stayed casual. My tolerance grew, my ability to handle alcohol increased, and soon I couldn't go a day without it. It started slow, just a couple of glasses of wine to unwind after a long day of work. Then it became something I needed to function, not something I enjoyed. I wasn't proud of it, and I certainly wasn't open about it. In fact, I became a master at hiding it. I'd tell people I was fine, that I didn't need help, that I was strong enough to handle it. After all, I was the one everyone came to for advice. I was the counselor, the one with the answers, the one who could fix everything for others. But the truth was, I had never been able to fix myself. I prided myself on my ability to help people climb out of their own personal hells of addiction. But each time I helped someone take their first steps toward recovery, I couldn't help but wonder why I couldn't do the same for myself. I tried, of course. I'd promised myself countless times that I was done drinking, that this was the last binge, the last blackout. I had sworn it to my friends, to my clients, even to my own reflection. But it was like trying to hold water in my hands. No matter how hard I tried to grip onto sobriety, it always slipped through my fingers. I felt trapped. I had built my life around helping others, but I couldn't even help myself. I watched as people who had walked through the doors of my office and into my programs found healing, their lives transforming before my eyes. Meanwhile, I was stuck in a cycle of self-doubt, guilt, and shame. I had always thought of myself as strong, resilient, and in control. But that control was slipping, piece by piece. Every time I drank, I lost a little more of myself. I felt like a fraud, like I was living a lie. And every time I stood in front of someone else, giving them advice about their recovery, I felt like I was sinking deeper into my own. I remember the 4th of July as if it were yesterday. The air was thick with heat, and the city felt alive with the sounds of fireworks, laughter, and celebration. I was supposed to meet a friend for dinner, but the thought of being around people, pretending to be okay, felt unbearable. I needed a drink, a quick escape, something to take the edge off. I knew I shouldn't. I knew that getting behind the wheel while intoxicated was reckless, irresponsible, and dangerous. But the voice in my head, the one that had been whispering to me for years, was louder than ever. It told me that I deserved it, that I had earned it. I got in my truck. I drove. Manhattan was hot and suffocating that evening. The roads were crowded, cars inching along, tourists snapping photos of the skyline, families gathering in parks. I could feel the tension in the city, an electric charge in the air. It was supposed to be a joyful time, a time of celebration. But for me, it felt like the weight of my entire life was crashing down on me. My failed relationships, my addiction, my inability to break free from the chains I had forged for myself. It was all too much. I could feel the pressure building inside me, the anger, the guilt, the frustration, the failure. I didn't want to feel it anymore. I wanted to escape, to numb the pain, to make it go away. And then, in a moment of complete helplessness, I lost control. The truck swerved as I tried to navigate through the busy streets, and for a split second, I felt the unmistakable weight of the vehicle as it slid out from under me. The next thing I knew, everything turned chaotic. The sound of screeching tires, the shouts of people scattering, the horrific crash of metal against concrete. It all happened so fast. As I felt the truck veer toward the crowd at Corlear's Hook Park, I couldn't stop it. My hands were gripping the wheel, but I wasn't in control anymore. It wasn't just the truck that was out of control, it was me. My life, my choices. I had no safety net left. In that instant, I realized the truth that had been building inside me for years. I had failed. I had failed everyone. My clients, my friends, my family, and most of all, myself. The independence I had always craved, the control, the sense of power over my life, had crumbled. And I was left with nothing but the realization that I couldn't fix this. As the truck hit the crowd and chaos erupted around me, something strange happened. I felt the weight of my body grow lighter. There was no pain, no fear, only a deep, unsettling stillness that washed over me. And just like that, I was no longer there. This moment, this crushing realization of failure, was the last I would remember from my life. It was the moment I lost control, not only of my truck, but of everything. Little did I know that was only the beginning of a journey that would take me far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. It happened all at once, and yet it was somehow gradual. My heart stopped. One moment I was inside my truck, gripping the wheel, my body tensing in terror, and then nothing. I could hear the chaos around me, the screams, the cries for help, the screech of metal on concrete, but I no longer felt the weight of it. I was no longer a part of the confusion below. There was no pain, no discomfort, no more tension in my muscles or the tightness in my chest. Everything, all the noise and frantic motion, seemed distant, like watching a storm from the safe comfort of a distant hill. I had no idea what was happening, only that something was shifting. It started with a sensation of release, as if I were gently lifted away from everything I had known. Slowly, like an object floating in the ocean, I began to ascend. I watched my body, the body I had known for 44 years, lay still on the pavement below. The lifeless form of someone I once was, someone I no longer recognized. My body, bloodied and broken, was surrounded by the chaos of the accident. I could see the people rushing to help, the paramedics, the frantic bystanders, but I was no longer tethered to any of it. The initial shock of watching my body like that, like a mere object discarded in a world full of pain, was disorienting. But strangely, there was no panic. There was no fear, no overwhelming sense of loss. The fear that had plagued me for so long, the fear of my addiction, the fear of facing the wreckage of my own life, was gone. For the first time, I wasn't trapped by my own emotions, my own guilt. It was a strange kind of peace, a tranquility that seemed to envelop me from the inside out. I could feel myself rising higher and higher, leaving the earth behind. The world below me became more and more distant, the buildings and streets shrinking into nothing more than shapes on a far-off canvas. The chaos of the accident, the confusion of my last moments, faded into the background as I floated, weightless, untethered. And as I continued to ascend, I realized something. I was free. Free from everything I had known. Free from the relentless pull of alcohol, free from the shame that clung to me like a second skin. The constant battle I had fought for so many years, the effort to stay sober, to live up to my promises, to be the counselor everyone expected me to be, it was all behind me now. For the first time, I felt no chains. No need to keep up the facade of being strong. No need to fight. No need to try to save anyone, least of all myself. There were no more expectations. There was no pressure to be perfect or to fix everything. It was as if, in that moment, I had been relieved of all the burdens I had carried for so long. The guilt, the failure, the mistakes I had made, the people I had hurt. None of it mattered anymore. They weren't with me here. They were back on Earth, left behind like an old coat I no longer needed. But even as I floated higher, even as the world below continued to fade into the distance, a strange thought flickered through my mind. What about independence? I had spent my life chasing it. I had believed so fervently that independence was the key to everything, that if I could just be in control, if I could just fix myself, I could finally escape the feelings of inadequacy, of failure. But now, as I drifted higher, I wondered if I had ever truly understood what independence meant. What had I fought for all these years? I had worked so hard to keep control, to avoid depending on anyone, to maintain my own strength. I had believed that being independent meant being self-sufficient, unshakable, in charge of my own fate. But now that I was free, now that I had crossed this boundary, leaving my physical self behind, I realized that the freedom I had fought for had been built on a lie. I wasn't sure where I was going, or what this new reality meant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that part of me, something deep inside, was still clinging to the idea that true independence meant being alone, unconnected. I had been so focused on escaping the past, on breaking free from my addiction and my failures, that I hadn't allowed myself to consider that maybe independence wasn't about avoiding connection. Maybe it wasn't about shutting everyone else out. Maybe it was about something far deeper, something I had never been able to see while I was alive. I wondered for a brief moment if I had wasted my life chasing the wrong kind of freedom. But that thought, fleeting as it was quickly replaced by something more profound. It wasn't regret. It wasn't a deep sorrow or a feeling of having missed something vital. It was the realization that whatever I had been, whatever I had done on earth, was now irrelevant. I was here. I was free from it all, and there was no turning back. As I floated, the world below me now nothing but a blur of shapes and sounds, I felt the weight of it all lift. The addiction, the broken promises, the failed relationships, all of it was left behind. But still, there was a part of me that lingered. I hadn't achieved independence while I was alive, not in the way I had thought I would. I had spent my life fighting against everything I feared, against every weakness I had ever acknowledged in myself. But the cost of that fight had been high. I had isolated myself, emotionally and spiritually, from the people who could have helped me. I had built walls, convinced that they were shields, when in reality, they were prisons. It was strange. This freedom felt like a vast, empty space. I was free, but it was different from what I had imagined. I had always believed that being free meant having no ties, no responsibilities, no connections. But now, as I floated through this weightless void, I couldn't help but feel that something was missing. A connection, perhaps. A purpose. Something that would tether me to this new existence. And just as the thought crossed my mind, a presence began to take shape in the distance. At first, it was just a small light, glowing softly in the distance. It was warm, inviting, and yet so foreign. It wasn't like the sterile coldness of the void I was floating in. It beckoned to me, like a lighthouse to a ship lost in the night. I didn't know what it was, but I felt drawn to it. Drawn to this light as if it had always been there, waiting for me. It wasn't something I could fight against. I knew, without a doubt, that this light was the next step in my journey. And as I moved toward it, I felt something else shift. An undercurrent of love, of understanding. A promise that something far greater awaited me. Something I had never understood while I was alive. I wasn't alone anymore. And whatever came next, I was ready to face it. I continued to float in the stillness of the vast emptiness, feeling both unmoored and at peace. The light in the distance grew brighter, pulling me toward it like gravity. But this light was different from any I had ever seen. It wasn't harsh or blinding. Instead, it radiated warmth, a deep, comforting light that seemed to fill every part of me, even the spaces I hadn't known existed. The more I moved toward it, the more it enveloped me, calling me with a quiet urgency, as though I had been waiting for this moment all my life. As I got closer, the shape of the light began to solidify, and I could see a figure standing in the center of it. I felt no fear, no hesitation. I knew who it was before I could even make out the details of his form. There was no mistaking him. The figure before me was unmistakably Jesus. His presence was beyond anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just his appearance, though that was profound. It was the overwhelming sense of love and peace that emanated from him. Every inch of his being radiated warmth, compassion, and acceptance. I had spent so much of my life yearning for this kind of love, for this kind of understanding, but I had never known it in the way I did now. He looked at me with eyes full of kindness and knowing, as if he had always known me, as if he had seen every part of me, my flaws, my mistakes, my darkest moments, and still, he loved me. There was no judgment in his gaze, no anger, no disappointment. There was only compassion. I felt as if every fiber of my being, every regret, every fear, every ounce of guilt melted away the instant our eyes met. The shame that had clung to me for so long was gone, dissolved in the light of his presence. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Words felt inadequate, unnecessary even. I had spent so much of my life trying to explain myself, to justify my mistakes, to earn forgiveness. But with him, there was no need for any of that. There was simply understanding. There was nothing I needed to prove, nothing I needed to hide. I was accepted just as I was in all my brokenness. He didn't ask me about the mistakes I had made, the people I had hurt, or the promises I had failed to keep. He didn't ask me why I had allowed my addiction to control me, or why I had let the weight of my guilt carry me so far from peace. He didn't need to. He already knew. His love was not contingent on any of it. It was simply there, an overwhelming force that enveloped me in a way that made me feel safe for the first time in so long. And then he spoke, his voice soft but powerful, like a melody that resonated deep within me. True independence, he said gently, is not the kind you have been chasing. It's not the kind that comes from self-reliance or avoidance of pain. True independence is born of love, grace, and forgiveness. It is not earned by your actions, but given freely by the one who loves you. The words he spoke were not just comforting, they were transformative. They struck deep into the heart of everything I had ever believed about myself. I had spent so much of my life striving for control, for the ability to stand on my own, to fix myself, to be free from the chains of my addiction and my past. I thought independence meant doing it all alone, being self-sufficient, not needing anyone, not asking for help. I believed that if I could just be strong enough, I would be free. But what Jesus was telling me was that my entire understanding of freedom had been wrong. True freedom, he told me, wasn't about being independent in the way I had always thought. Detached, isolated, self-reliant. It wasn't about avoiding pain or hiding from my mistakes. True freedom came from understanding, from accepting love and grace, from being healed in the presence of unconditional forgiveness. I began to feel something deep inside of me shift. It was like a weight I hadn't realized I had been carrying was suddenly lifted off my shoulders. All the guilt, all the shame that had clung to me for years began to fade away. I had spent so much of my life fighting, trying to fix myself, trying to be perfect, but none of that had ever brought me peace. None of it had ever allowed me to feel free. But here, in the presence of Jesus, I felt something different, something far greater than anything I had ever known. I wasn't fighting anymore. There was nothing to fix, no need to prove myself. I could simply be. I could rest in his love, knowing that I didn't need to carry the weight of my failures and regrets any longer. True independence, he said again, his voice so gentle, so full of understanding, is not about being free from others. It is about being free from the chains of guilt, shame, and self-condemnation that bind you. It is about being free to love and be loved, to forgive and be forgiven. And that freedom, my child, is always given to you by grace. As he spoke, I felt the truth of his words sink deeper and deeper into my heart. The chains that had bound me for so long, chains of addiction, of guilt, of self-loathing, were not broken by my own strength, by my own willpower. They were broken by his love. They were broken by the grace that he was offering me in this moment. And that was the key to true independence. Not the ability to stand alone, but the ability to stand in the truth of God's love and grace, knowing that I was not alone, never had been, and never would be again. I realized then that I had spent so much time running from my past, from my mistakes, from the brokenness inside me. I had tried to fix myself, tried to control everything around me, but I had never once allowed myself to be healed by grace. I had thought that healing came from effort, from pushing through, from fighting my way out of the darkness. But now I saw that healing came from surrender. It came from allowing myself to be loved fully and without condition. Jesus, I whispered, almost unsure of the words, but they came anyway. Am I truly forgiven? Is it really that simple? He smiled, a warm, knowing smile, and nodded. My love for you is not based on your perfection. It is based on who you are, a beloved child of God. And no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, my love for you is unwavering. You are forgiven, not because you earned it, but because it is freely given. And that forgiveness is the foundation of your true freedom. I was overwhelmed, not by fear or confusion, but by a sense of peace I had never known. I felt something inside me shift, a deep, profound peace, like a river flowing gently through my soul, washing away every ounce of guilt, every bit of shame I had carried for so long. There was no more need to fight. There was no more need to prove myself. Jesus didn't want me to be independent from others. He wanted me to be free from the lies I had told myself, the walls I had built around my heart. He wanted me to be free from the chains of guilt and shame that had held me captive for so long. I realized now that true independence wasn't about standing apart from everyone, about being strong on my own. True independence came from the willingness to accept love, love that heals, love that forgives, love that holds you no matter what you've done. And in that love, there is no room for fear, no room for shame. I was free, truly free. But the freedom I felt now wasn't the kind I had always imagined. It wasn't a cold, distant freedom that pushed others away. It was a freedom that embraced connection, that allowed me to stand in the truth of who I was without needing to hide. In that moment, I knew what I had been searching for all along. True freedom was not about escaping the world. It was about embracing it, with all its pain, its mess, its imperfections, and letting love and grace heal it. It was about embracing others, forgiving others, and allowing myself to be embraced and forgiven in return. And I knew, deep in my soul, that my journey was not over. In fact, it was just beginning. The feeling of floating, of being untethered, began to shift. One moment I was held in the soft glow of Jesus' presence, and the next, I found myself standing alone in the middle of an infinite empty landscape. There were no walls, no edges, no limits of any kind. The vastness stretched out in all directions, the horizon indistinct, like the edge of a blank canvas. The ground beneath me felt like soft earth, cool and neutral, but there was no real sense of direction. I could walk in any direction, but I had no idea where I was going, or even if there was anywhere to go. At first, the emptiness was exhilarating. For the first time in my life, there were no restrictions, no responsibilities, no demands. It was like standing at the very edge of freedom. The burden of guilt, the constant struggle with addiction, the need to perform, to fix myself, all of it was gone. There were no people to disappoint, no expectations to meet. I could do anything, be anything, but that freedom quickly turned suffocating. Without direction, the ground beneath my feet seemed to tilt. The endless expanse was overwhelming. It wasn't just liberating, it was paralyzing. There was no path to follow, no guide to tell me where to go, and that void left me feeling more lost than ever. I felt as if I could move, but I didn't know where to begin. It was an absence of structure, but more than that, it was an absence of meaning. I could walk, yes, but to what end? As I stood there, trying to find a way forward, a series of images began to materialize before me, almost like memories from another life, but they weren't mine, at least not all of them. Each vision was of a different version of myself, locked in a struggle I couldn't quite escape. The first was a young girl, no older than 8, sitting in a small, dimly lit room. The walls seemed to close in around her, and she was crying. Her hands were outstretched, reaching, but no one was there to help. I could feel her fear, her loneliness, and the desperation that clung to her like a heavy weight. She longed for freedom, for someone to take her hand and guide her out of that isolation, but she was too afraid to ask for help. She was alone in a room that felt like a prison, her own chains made of silence and self-doubt. I could hear her thoughts, though not in words, but in the rawness of her emotions. She wanted to be free, but she didn't know how. She didn't understand that asking for help was part of being free. She thought that independence meant standing alone, carrying her own pain without burdening anyone else. She thought that if she just tried hard enough, she could escape the chains she had placed around herself. And then, as quickly as she appeared, the vision faded. Another version of me appeared, a woman in her 30s, tired and weathered, standing in front of a mirror. Her face was etched with lines, not from age but from the years of internal battle. She had fought so hard for so long against forces that felt too big to handle: addiction, loneliness, fear of judgment. But now it was clear to me that the fight had worn her down. Her eyes were vacant, defeated. She had lost the energy to keep fighting the same battles. She had tried so hard to be self-sufficient, to overcome everything on her own, but now it was all slipping through her fingers. She had thought she could fight her way out of her problems, but the harder she fought, the more fractured she became. Her pursuit of independence had become a constant cycle of self-punishment, a never-ending loop where she would push others away, only to find herself more alone, more disconnected, more trapped in her own mind. I could feel the exhaustion in her bones, the weariness that came from years of battling herself. And yet she still believed that the key to freedom was to do it all alone, to somehow master everything, control everything. But the truth was that every attempt to fix herself only made the gap between her and peace wider. She was trapped not by the world around her, but by her own isolation, her own inability to let go of the belief that freedom came through force, not surrender. As I watched these versions of myself struggle, I felt a profound sense of sorrow for them. I could see now that their search for independence had never really been about freedom. It had been about running away from fear, from pain, from the very emotions they didn't know how to deal with. And every time they tried to break free by pushing away others, by forcing themselves to be strong, they only created deeper divides within themselves. The vision shifted, and I saw another version of myself. This one much older, perhaps in her 60s, walking down a long, barren road. Her shoulders were hunched from the weight of a lifetime of self-reliance, of pushing away the help and love of others, convinced that she didn't need anyone. She had spent years building walls around her heart, believing that she could protect herself by shutting everyone out. But now, in this vision, she was alone on that empty road, carrying the weight of her solitude like a stone that had grown heavier with each passing year. I could feel the loneliness in her heart, the sorrow that came from a lifetime of pushing others away in the name of independence. She had thought that independence meant avoiding vulnerability, but now, in the twilight of her life, she realized how wrong she had been. She had built a life of isolation, and it had left her empty. She had rejected love, rejected the world, but now she understood that the price of that independence had been a lifetime of unfulfilled longing. At that moment, I heard a voice, a familiar voice, gentle and soothing, yet firm with wisdom. It was Jesus, his presence filling the air with a calm that was unlike anything I had ever known. True freedom, he said softly, does not come from running away. It does not come from avoiding what you fear. True independence is not about doing everything alone. It is about learning to face what frightens you, learning to accept others, and learning to live with vulnerability. Independence without love or grace only leads to more isolation. And that isolation, my child, is its own prison. His words cut through the confusion in my mind, piercing the haze of self-doubt and fear. It was as if I had been searching for the key to freedom in all the wrong places. I had spent my life trying to escape, trying to run from my pain, my addiction, my past. I thought that if I could just pull myself together, if I could just be strong enough, I would be free. But in truth, the more I tried to distance myself from others, the more I tried to avoid the vulnerability that came with connection, the more trapped I became. The chains I had been trying to escape were not external. They were internal, born of my refusal to face my own fears, my own shortcomings, and to let others help me carry the burden. Jesus continued, his voice wrapping around me like a warm embrace. Independence is not about escaping the world, but learning to live within it. With love, with grace, and with acceptance. You cannot find peace in isolation. You cannot be truly free if you shut yourself off from others. The freedom you seek comes from facing your fears and your flaws, from opening yourself to others, and most importantly, from accepting my love and forgiveness. I stood in the vast emptiness, the weight of his words settling in my heart like a deep, profound truth. The version of me I had seen, the older woman, was right. I had spent my life building walls, thinking they would protect me, but they had only kept me locked in a prison of my own making. The key to true independence was not in pushing others away, not in forcing myself to be self-sufficient, but in learning to face my fears, to accept my imperfections, and to let love in, both from God and from those around me. True independence, I realized, was not about avoiding the world or running from my emotions. It was about learning to live with them, to embrace them, and to let them shape me into someone stronger, more connected, and more whole. It was about vulnerability, not control. And for the first time, I understood that my journey to true freedom could only begin when I stopped trying to escape and started facing the world and myself with love and grace. There was no easy answer, no simple path forward, but there was a quiet peace in that realization. The struggle I had fought for so long, the battle for control, for self-sufficiency, had been the wrong fight. True freedom was not in escaping my past, my flaws, or my fears. It was in accepting them and learning to live with them, not alone, but in community with others, with grace, with love. And in that moment, I knew I was ready to begin that journey, not toward independence as I had once understood it, but toward a deeper, truer freedom. The scene shifted again, and I found myself standing in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with neatly organized rows of books that I had once turned to for strength and guidance. The surface of the room seemed pristine, orderly, almost perfect in its arrangement. At a glance, it looked like the ideal space of a person who had worked hard to create a life of independence. It was the image of someone who had achieved control, who had mastered the art of self-sufficiency. But as I looked closer, something felt off. The room was not as peaceful as it first appeared. There were piles of papers scattered across the desk and the floor, their edges curling and fraying with age. The letters, hundreds of them it seemed, were unopened. Messages from friends, family, and even strangers, all asking for help, seeking guidance, or simply yearning for connection. Each letter held a piece of someone's life, a plea for attention, a moment of vulnerability offered to me. But I had not read them. I had not answered. The books that once symbolized my hard-won strength now felt like relics, dusty, abandoned, ignored. They had once been my refuge, my source of knowledge and insight. But now they lay untouched, gathering dust as though they no longer held any meaning. They were symbols of my unfulfilled promises, the things I had neglected in the name of independence. My pursuit of solitude and self-reliance had come at the cost of connection, of the very relationships that once made my work and my life meaningful. As I stood in the middle of the room, I tried to move, to pick up one of the letters, to do something, to change the scene around me. But my legs felt heavy, as though they were weighted down by the very room I was in, by the choices I had made. I struggled to stand, but the weight of it all, of the neglected relationships, the broken promises, the unresolved connections, pulled me back down. The room, the papers, the books, they all felt suffocating, pressing in on me. I wanted to run, to escape it, but there was no place to go. I could only stand there, trapped in the reality I had created. In the corner of the room was a mirror, and as I approached it, I saw my reflection. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow from years of isolation and internal conflict. She was the same woman who had prided herself on being self-sufficient, on never needing anyone. She had spent her life building walls, pushing others away in the name of independence, believing that freedom was found in doing everything on her own. But now, staring into her own eyes, she could see the cost of that choice. I could feel the loneliness radiating from her, the deep, unshakable ache of being disconnected from the world, from those who had once cared. The self-imposed isolation that she had believed would bring her peace had instead become a prison. She had sought freedom, but in doing so, she had abandoned the very responsibilities that made freedom meaningful. Responsibilities to those around her, to the people who had trusted her, to the relationships that had given her life purpose. The realization hit me like a wave. Independence, I now understood, was not just about standing alone. It was not just about achieving control or avoiding dependence on others. True independence came with responsibility, the responsibility to be accountable, to maintain connections, to nurture relationships. In my quest for freedom, I had ignored these responsibilities. I had withdrawn into myself, seeking control and solitude, but in doing so, I had abandoned the very people I had once promised to help. My independence was incomplete because it had been built on avoidance, not engagement. I had traded connection for isolation, and in doing so, I had lost something more important than freedom. I had lost love. Suddenly, I heard Jesus' voice again, gentle yet clear, as though it came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. To be truly free, one must be willing to face the consequences of independence. freedom without responsibility can be as much of a prison as dependency. His words cut through the fog of my thoughts, sharpening the clarity in my mind. I understood now. Freedom was not about escaping the world or cutting myself off from others. It was about accepting the consequences of my choices, about taking responsibility for the impact my actions had on those around me. My desire for independence had blinded me to this truth. I had sought freedom in isolation, in self-reliance, but it had left me hollow. I had been running from the very things that could have brought me peace, love, connection, vulnerability. Jesus continued, his voice warm and reassuring, "You cannot find true freedom in isolation. Independence without love, without connection, without accountability, is empty. It is a freedom that cannot stand. To be free is to be responsible, to be accountable for the lives you touch. True freedom is not about living without anyone. True freedom is living in harmony, in grace, in unity." As his words settled into my heart, I saw the room again, this time with different eyes. The piles of letters, the forgotten books, they were no longer just symbols of neglect. They were reminders of the responsibilities I had abandoned. But they were also a call to action. I could still pick up those letters. I could still answer the calls for help. I could still rebuild the connections I had let fall apart. True independence was not about doing it alone. It was about doing it together, with love and responsibility. It was about recognizing that every choice I made affected the people around me, and that true freedom came with the willingness to face those consequences. The weight in my legs began to lift. I could move again slowly at first, but with each step, the burden felt lighter. I understood now. The responsibility I had rejected for so long was not a burden, it was a gift. It was the path to true freedom, the freedom that came from being connected to others, from being accountable for the lives I touched. I had tried to escape the world, but in doing so, I had only created a deeper prison for myself. It was time to step out of that prison, to embrace responsibility, to rebuild what I had broken. As I stood in the room, I realized that I was no longer a prisoner of my own independence. I was free to choose, to reach out, to reconnect, to heal the relationships I had abandoned. The woman in the mirror was not just a reflection of my past mistakes. She was a reflection of the choices I still had the power to make. True independence was not about running away or doing it all alone. It was about embracing the responsibility of love, of connection, of healing. Jesus' voice echoed in my heart once again. You are not alone. You never were. Your true freedom lies in accepting the responsibility to love, to care, and to be accountable for the relationships you have. Only then will you find the peace you seek. And with that, I felt a deep, profound shift within me. I was ready to move forward, not alone, but in harmony with the world around me. I was ready to take responsibility, not just for myself, but for the people I had once tried to distance myself from. True independence was not about isolation. It was about connection. It was about love. And it was about taking responsibility for the impact my life had on others. The room faded into the distance, but the lesson remained, imprinted on my heart like a burning flame. True freedom, I now understood, came not from rejecting the world, but from embracing it, embracing my place in it, embracing my responsibilities, and embracing love. The peace I had felt in his presence, serene, overwhelming, and pure, began to shift. It was as if the air around us thickened with a sense of urgency, an energy that both soothed and unsettled. I was still floating in this space beyond life, beyond time, yet something was changing within me. The light around me dimmed just a fraction, and Jesus, who had been silent for a moment, spoke again. His voice was calm, but the gravity of his words carried an undeniable weight. "The world is broken," he said, his voice gentle but filled with profound sorrow. "It is not the world I intended. It is a place of division, of judgment, of pride. But that is not the end of the story. There is a greater truth that the world needs to understand, a truth that many have yet to comprehend." I felt a stirring within me. My heart, once so burdened with guilt and shame, now swelled with a sense of purpose I had never known. His words, so simple and yet so monumental, cut through the layers of my own thoughts and fears. "Independence without love, forgiveness, and unity is nothing," Jesus continued. His words reverberated in the very core of my being, like a bell tolling deep within my soul. "Independence without these is hollow, incomplete, and will only lead to more suffering. As he spoke, I realized the depth of what he was saying. The freedom I had once sought, the independence I had worked so hard to achieve, had been based on a false premise. I had believed that if I could just stand alone, without needing anyone, without depending on anyone, that I would be free. But I had been wrong. True freedom, true independence, was never about isolation or self-reliance. It was about love. It was about forgiveness. It was about finding unity, not just with others, but with the deeper part of ourselves and the Creator. Jesus' gaze met mine, and for the first time, I felt the true weight of his love, unconditional, unwavering, and full of grace. He knew my heart, all of it, the mistakes, the regrets, the moments of weakness, and yet he did not judge me. He embraced me with such tenderness that I felt my spirit, once burdened and weary, being renewed. But there was something more, something I had not expected. "Your life is not over," he said, his voice carrying an urgency that made my heart race. "Your mission is not yet complete. You have been given the gift of seeing the truth of true freedom. Now you must go back to share it with others. The world needs healing, and you must return to help them find it." The words pierced me deeply. I had been standing in the presence of pure peace, a peace I had longed for my entire life, and yet I was being called to leave it. I felt a deep sense of loss, but at the same time, I knew that I could not abandon what I had learned. The world, the people still struggling, still trapped in their chains of guilt, shame, and addiction, they needed this message more than anything. They needed to know that true freedom could be found, not in running away, not in standing alone, but in embracing love, forgiveness, and unity. "You are needed," Jesus continued, his voice filled with a sense of urgency that matched the gravity of his message. The chains of addiction, guilt, and division can be broken through love, but the world does not know this. They need someone who has seen the truth of it to return, to help them understand. I felt the weight of his words settle in my heart, deeper than anything I had ever experienced. This was no longer just a personal journey of healing. It was a mission, a calling. The work ahead was monumental, but I could feel that it was the only work that mattered. Heaven, with all its peace and stillness, was beautiful, but it was not my place anymore. My place was on earth, in the broken world, where I had once tried to help but had failed. I felt the pull of earth again, like a tether, delicate yet strong. The world, so full of pain, of addiction, of division, needed healing. The people needed to hear the message that I had been given. There was no more time to waste. As much as heaven offered peace, the world needed that peace more. The world needed healing, and I was being called to be a part of that healing. "Go back," Jesus said, his eyes filled with compassion and purpose. "Help them see that true freedom comes not from pride or judgment, but from forgiveness and love. Let go of the past and help them let go. You will carry this message, this light, back into the world, and you will show them the way." I felt the call of responsibility and purpose filling me, something I had long avoided, something that had been so overwhelming in life. It felt like the weight of my own mistakes had been transformed into a mission of healing. A deep knowing settled in my heart. I was not returning to my old life. I was not going back to simply try to save others. No, this was different. I was being sent back to show them the way, to guide them not to their own independence, but to true freedom. A freedom found in connection, in vulnerability, in grace, and in the acceptance of forgiveness. The world was in desperate need of healing, and I, this broken, flawed woman, was being asked to help. I had spent so many years trying to prove that I didn't need anyone, that I could do it all on my own. But now I knew true freedom would never come from doing it alone. It came from love, it came from unity, it came from forgiveness, and it was rooted in the shared experiences of humanity. To heal, to break the chains that bound us, we needed to embrace each other. The sense of urgency was palpable. It was no longer a gentle call, it was a command. "It is time for you to go back. Time for you to share the truth of love and forgiveness," Jesus repeated, his tone soft but insistent. And in that moment, I understood. I could not remain in heaven. As much as it offered peace, it was not the place for me. I had seen the truth. True freedom was about letting go of pride, judgment, and hate. And the world needed this message. The world needed me to go back and share it. Not as a perfect person, not as someone who had figured everything out, but as someone who had walked through darkness and come out with the light of understanding. I had to go back. I felt the familiar pull of my earthly body, a tug so strong I could no longer resist it. The weight of responsibility, of the mission that lay ahead, settled in me. I was ready. I understood now. True freedom could only be achieved when we embraced love, forgiveness, and unity. I was being sent to show the world that independence was not about standing alone. It was about standing together, with grace, with humility, and with love. And as the light around me brightened again, I knew. It was time to return. "I will go," I whispered, my heart steady, the urgency now a part of me. "I will return to heal." With that, I felt myself being gently but firmly drawn back toward earth. The peace of heaven, while beautiful, was no longer my destination. I was being called to the world to help others break free, just as I had, just as Jesus had helped me. I don't know how long I had been gone. Time doesn't seem to matter when you're not anchored to your body, to the world. But when I opened my eyes, the weight of gravity was unmistakable. The sterile smell of antiseptic flooded my senses, and the rhythmic beeping of machines became my first reality. I was back. I had returned to the world I had once known, but it was different now. I could feel it deep inside me. Everything had changed. Pain coursed through my body, sharp and disorienting. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, uncooperative. The world around me was blurry at first, but slowly I could make out the figures of medical staff moving around me, their faces masked and hurried. Someone was calling my name, their voice filled with concern, but I could barely focus on the words. I felt an odd sense of detachment from my physical body, as if I were a spectator in my own life. I was aware of the pain, deep bruises, broken bones, the exhaustion of having been in a violent crash, but it didn't frighten me. There was something else now, something far more powerful than the pain. It was the stirring of purpose, of something that felt so vital, so essential. I had been given another chance, not just to live, but to live with meaning. In the days that followed, I slowly became more aware of the extent of my injuries. I was bedridden for weeks, unable to move freely, unable to return to the life I had known. But there was no anger, no frustration over my new limitations. I had seen what was beyond this life, what was possible. I had witnessed the power of love, forgiveness, and true freedom. My body was broken, but my spirit was more alive than it had ever been. The visions I had seen, the encounter with Jesus, the clarity he had shared with me, these experiences now filled me with a fire that burned through every fiber of my being. As I lay there, recovering, I knew my life had been given a new mission. I had returned with a purpose, one that was so clear and undeniable that I felt as if I was being propelled forward by an unseen force. I knew what I had to do. Each day, as I healed physically, my understanding deepened. The visions of Jesus, of the broken world, of the chains of guilt and addiction that bound so many, never left my mind. I remembered the urgency in his voice, the way he had looked at me with such deep compassion and understanding. He had sent me back for a reason, and that reason wasn't just for me to live for myself. No, it was to help others, to bring the message of true freedom, freedom that wasn't based on self-reliance or pride, but on love, forgiveness, and unity. In those quiet hospital rooms, with the hum of machines and the bustle of nurses going about their tasks, I began to speak to those who would listen. I shared the vision I had, the message of freedom I had received, and the truth I had learned from Jesus. At first, they looked at me with disbelief. After all, how could someone who had been in such an accident, someone who had been so broken, have the clarity to speak of something so profound? But I was filled with a conviction that made my words powerful. I wasn't speaking from my own understanding anymore. I was speaking from a deeper place, a place of knowing. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the people around me, the ones who were still in chains, still struggling with guilt, shame, and addiction. I had been one of them. I had lived through it, fought it, and tried to control it. But I had learned that true freedom didn't come from control. It came from surrender. It came from the grace of forgiveness. True freedom, I told the nurse who had sat with me one evening, her tired eyes weary from years of service, doesn't come from fighting battles on your own. It doesn't come from standing alone, proving your strength. It comes from love, from forgiving yourself and others. It comes from understanding that the world is broken, but it can be healed, one person at a time. She looked at me with something between confusion and curiosity. You believe that? I don't just believe it, I said, feeling the words resonate deep within me. I know it. I've seen it. I've felt it. I've been there. Her expression softened, and for a moment, I could see that something in her was shifting. She wasn't fully convinced, but she was open to hearing more, and that was enough for me. I wasn't here to force anyone to believe. I was here to share what I had been given, to plant a seed and to trust that it would grow. Over time, more people came to listen. Visitors, doctors, even the patients in the beds beside me. Everyone could feel the change in me. It was as if a light had been turned on in a room that had long been dark. Some came skeptically, unsure of what I was saying, while others came with open hearts, eager for the hope I was offering. But they all listened, and I spoke with a fire I had never known in my life. The words flowed from me, not because I was smart or insightful, but because I had experienced something so powerful that I couldn't keep it to myself. I told them of the chains I had carried, chains of guilt, shame, addiction, and how I had thought that breaking free meant doing it alone. But I was wrong. It was only through love and forgiveness, through letting go of the pride and fear that kept me locked away, that I had truly found freedom. And it was only then, when I realized I didn't have to do it alone, that I could help others break free too. Each person who listened was like a small victory. Some seemed skeptical, some seemed indifferent, but others, those who had struggled in their own ways, began to respond. They began to see something in me that they hadn't seen before. They saw someone who had been broken and was now whole. They saw someone who had once been lost and was now found. I didn't know how to help everyone, but I knew I could help one person at a time. The world was too broken to be healed in one moment, in one sweeping gesture. But I had been given a mission, a new purpose, and I would fulfill it. I would share the message of freedom that I had received, the freedom that came from forgiveness, from understanding, and from love. And slowly, as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to heal. Not just physically, but spiritually. I no longer saw the world the same way. I didn't see it as a place full of people to fix, people to help from a distance. No. I saw it as a place full of people who were struggling just like I had. People who needed love, not judgment. People who needed to be shown the way to true freedom. The more I shared, the more I realized that this was my mission. Not just to help people break free from addiction, but to show them that true freedom was not in isolation, not in standing alone. It was in connection. It was in reaching out, in offering love and forgiveness. It was in seeing others as broken but worthy, just like I had been. And every time I spoke, every time I shared my story, I felt the strength of my purpose grow. I knew I was on the right path, even if I couldn't see the whole journey ahead. The work would be hard and it would take time, but I was determined. One person at a time, I would help others find the same freedom I had found. Because the world is broken, but it can be healed. And I, this once broken woman, was going to do my part to help heal it.